Good day, everyone. I'm James Appleby, the Executive Director of the Gerontological Society of America. I'm happy to welcome listeners today as we discuss the National Institute on Aging's budget and grant funding. These are matters that are very important for both your work and, more broadly, for the future of aging research in this country and the contribution it makes to improving the lives of people as they age. Today's sold-out webinar was made possible by the Gsa Innovation Fund, which is supported by generous contributions from our members. We also are pleased to have the Friends of the National Institute on Aging and the American Geriatric Society join GSA as co-sponsors of today's program. Before I introduce our presenter for today's webinar, I'd like to ask GSA team member Julia Mishi to provide an overview of the webinar features we will be using today. Julia?
Thank you, James. I'll take just a moment to briefly familiarize everyone with some of the features of the Lotus Life software we will be using today. First, please take a look at your screen and notice that it is currently divided. In the larger viewing window, you should see the welcome slide for today's webinar, or actually now the participant instruction slide. To the right of your screen, you should see the discussion window. If you would like to change the view so that the slide presentation is larger, simply put your cursor over the dividing line between the slides and the discussion window. Click and pull the line to the right to enlarge the slide window. Today, we will be accepting questions through the chat feature accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. To access the chat feature, click on the discussion bubble located at the top part of the discussion window. After clicking on the discussion bubble, you may submit a question by locating the box in the lower right-hand side of your screen, just below the drop-down menu that allows you to select a recipient. Insert your question in the box below this drop-down menu and hit Send. Please note, you do not need to select a recipient. Your question will go directly to a moderator who will be compiling questions during today's webinar. Also, please note that your message will not be seen by other participants. The chat feature will only be enabled to allow messages to be sent directly to the moderator. One last feature you will notice is a raise hand function. We will not be using this feature today, so if you have a question, please be sure to use the chat feature just described to communicate with our moderator. As explained, a moderator will be monitoring questions throughout today's presentation. We will do our best to address as many questions as possible, time permitting, during the last half of the webinar. We will also be posting a list of questions and answers on our webinar page on the GSA website. We'll give you instructions on how to access this information at the end of this afternoon's presentation. I hope this information will be helpful to you during today's webinar. And now, without further delay, I'd like to turn things back over to James Appleby.
Thank you, Julia. Today's special guest is Dr. Richard Hodes, the Director of the National Institute on Aging. Following his presentation, he will be participating in a question and answer session about the future of his agency as it faces budget challenges and struggles to provide funding for critical aging research. Dr. Hodes, a leading immunologist, was named director of the NIA in 1993 to oversee studies of the basic, clinical, epidemiological, and social aspects of aging. Under his stewardship, the NIA budget has surpassed $1 billion. In the last few years, a decrease in the number of NIA-funded research project grant applications has caused concern within the aging research community. The aspect that has attracted perhaps the most attention is the NIA's payline. This is an agency's funding cutoff point for applications received. As Congress moves forward with the fiscal year 2012 budget, the issue of safeguarding important research dollars is going to be in the spotlight once again. Dr. Hodes, welcome. On behalf of GSA, AGS, and Friends of the NIA, thank you for making the time to be with us today. I'm sure you're eager to share what the NIA is doing to advance federally funded aging research. Dr. Hodes?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with all of you to meet by webinar. And I look forward to this opportunity to talk with you about what I think from your questions are some of the important issues that are of concern to us and to all of you in the aging research community. Just to begin by introduction to NIA, as most of you are probably aware, it was established in 1974, so one of the relatively newer institutes at NIH, to support and conduct research on aging processes, aging-related diseases, and special problems and needs of the aged. In addition to supporting research, it supports training and development of scientists, provides research resources, and then, importantly, disseminates the information gathered on health and research advances. Let me move in this next slide to the opening of the theme for the day, namely budget. And this figure demonstrates the appropriations history of the National Institute on Aging from fiscal year 2003, which some of you will remember as the end of the doubling of the NIH and, in fact, the NIA budget, through 2011 and an estimate of 2012. And you'll notice that there are two lines here. The upper line in blue is, in fact, the budget appropriation by year in current dollars. That's the actual dollar allocation. And you can see that in 2003, we approximated the $1 billion level and then have seen small increases since that time. The lower line in red, in many ways, is the more informative because this reflects the constant dollar budget that is corrected for the rate of biomedical inflation. And what this shows is, in fact, an erosion of buying power, the ability to support medical research over this period. So that cumulatively, from 2003 through 2011, there's been an approximately 18% decrease in the funds available, buying power to support research, precisely at a time when scientific opportunities have been expanding at an inordinate rate. And this has been a source of great challenge and at times pain to all of us. Now, to understand a bit more about the budget, the NIA budget, and where it is spent, this figure is a pie diagram that compares for the overall NIH budget on the left and for the NIA budget on the right for the fiscal year 2010, a breakdown by mechanisms. And I won't go through all the mechanisms, but do want to stress that far and away the largest share of the pie in blue is the research project or grants line, which for NIA, typical of many years now, is about 64%, somewhat higher than the 52% average for all of NIH. And this indeed reflects the current, ongoing, and anticipated continued commitment to investigator-initiated research. Other important mechanisms on here include centers programs, training, career development, contracts, all of which support our research as well. This slide breaks down further this large category of grants by size of grant, by size of award here in terms of direct cost or dollars. So you can see in blue a large 41% of the pie is for awards, and this is over the cumulative period of 2006 to 2010 in the relatively lower cost level that is less than $300,000 per year, direct costs. In red, the $300,000 to $1.5 million, and then the smaller areas in green, about 9% and $1.5 to $3 million, and about 9% for the greater than $3 million, very large awards. Now, the way in which we measure, importantly, our funding success, or the success in being funded by applicants, is really dependent upon two measures. The one that probably is most often discussed is payline. And this is an institute-specific measure of the percentile rank at which funding occurs. So it is the point at which essentially all applications which receive a score at this level or better will be funded. And it's important, and I'll come to this in some more specifics, that different institutes calculate their pay lines in different ways. In terms of accuracy and uniformity, there's really the success rate, which is the NIH-wide measure of the percentage of awards made from the applications received each year. This number published per institute and for NIH overall is determined only at the end of the fiscal year. So these are the two numbers that we will be dealing with in further discussions. So importantly, as our budget and its buying power in constant dollars has decreased, we've seen over this period, here on this slide, illustrated from 1999 through the present, what has happened to the success rate, the probability that a grant will be funded, an application will be funded, both for NIH in green and for NIA in blue. And you can see the decrease in this level rather continuously and in parallel over this full period. You'll note in particular, though, in 2010, that there was a divergence that the NIA pay line, which was at the 8th percentile level, that's 2010, last year, was lower than that for NIH overall. And this then became, for all of us, and I'm sure for all of you, a double concern. It was a concern because the decrease in success rates across all of NIH were a challenge for all investigators. They were a challenge for new investigators as well as established investigators. And the fact that NIA's success rate was lower still than the average was a particular concern to all of us for fear that it would lead to a migration of investigators out of NIA-supported aging research into other areas based on the very rational calculation of where they were more likely to succeed. And so, as we'll be discussing in a number of the slides to follow, and I'm sure in some of the questions we'll deal with, it was incumbent upon NIA and felt very strongly as we recognized this number to do what we could to modify and correct it. So we first had to determine the reasons for reducing pay lines at NIA, and in fact, as I said, this could apply to all of NIH. One was that there were fewer small grants submitted, fewer R03s and R21s. So if you'll remember, all applications are figured into the success rate or the funding level, so that if there are R03s and R21s which are at a lower cost level, more can be funded and the success rate will be higher. Fewer of them actually submitted, and therefore fewer funded in fiscal 2010 was one of the reasons for a decrease in success rate. Another, and we'll come back to talk about this further, big science such as clinical trials or large awards. And then finally, in this third bullet turned out to be, as we analyzed it, the predominant feature. There was an actual increase in the average size of typical grant applications, that is R01s, across the full spectrum of cost. Research, in fact, is becoming more expensive and appeared to be doing so in the aging field across all areas of research. So most importantly, I turned to this. Really what mattered to us was the degree to which we could modify policies and practices in a way that would improve pay lines, improve success rate for investigators. And this then, in 2011, is what we have posted as our estimated, rather firmly estimated pay line for the year. And as a part, as we'll talk about it, the strategy, we have established two different pay lines, one for the less expensive applications, here defined as less than $500,000 in direct costs, and the other for applications more expensive, greater than or equal to $500,000. And you'll recognize that for the more expensive awards over $500,000, in fact, it is required that applicants get permission from NIA in order to even submit. This became a natural choice point at which we could discriminate by pay lines. So in 2011, for established investigators, that is other than early stage or new investigators, the pay line for the less expensive awards under $500,000 would be at the 11th percentile. For the more expensive, over $500,000, the 8th percentile. And I next want to stress in these next two lines the particular concern we had to maintain a success rate for early and other new investigators that would encourage, not discourage, their entry into the field of aging research. So for early stage investigators who were defined by investigators within a limited number of years from the end of their training and who have not previously had an R01 or R01 equivalent award, the pay line for 2011 is 16th percent for the applications under $500,000. For the more expensive, and there are fewer of them from new investigators, but some, awards over $500,000, early stage investigators will be paid through the 13th percentile. There's also a category of new investigators who have not received an R01 but are more senior, and here the pay lines respectively for the two categories of less and more expensive awards are the 14th and 11th percentiles. So this is a substantial improvement over the last year, and again we'll have time to talk about some of the strategies that are responsible for it. But also important is to give you an idea of how this compares to pay lines elsewhere at NIH. And in fact, at this point, only a couple of other institutes have posted their pay lines, and so I illustrate this here. It may be that over the weeks and months to come there'll be additional postings, but NIID, the very large Allergy Institute, has posted its pay line at the 10th percentile, and for early stage in the percentile, NINDS has posted its percentile at the 14th, and NIA, just to remind you here, is at the 11th percentile for the less expensive awards for not new investigators in the 16th. So I don't know how this is going to turn out for the full complement of investigators and applying to all of the institutes at NIH, but it appears that NIA, though these are not by any means the pay lines, the thresholds that we would wish for, is going to be rather more typical of other institutes at NIH. So stressing a little further the importance we're placing on new investigators and their opportunities at NIA, we've talked about the benefits given in terms of thresholds for R01 applications, and that's repeated here. In addition, we would stress that career development awards, such as the K01, are continued to be support with a substantial investment, and the K08, K23, including the Beeson Career Development Award program, will continue to be supported this year and in the foreseeable future. Finally, this is just a reminder to you that a good deal of the information that we are providing here can be seen in far more detail and will be kept up to date on NIA's current and soon to be updated and modified and improved website, and we invite you all to participate here. So again, I thank you very much for this opportunity. Now look forward in the rest of the time to addressing those questions which are important to all of you and having a chance to hear and respond to them.
Thank you, Dr. Hodes, very much for your insightful presentation. And now we're going to be shifting over to the Q&A portion of today's program. Just a reminder, you may submit a question using the Lotus Live chat feature. To assess that feature, click on the discussion bubble located at the top part of this discussion window on the right-hand side of your screen. After clicking on the discussion bubble, you may submit a question by locating the box in the lower right-hand side of your screen just below the drop-down menu that allows you to select the recipient. Insert your question in the box below this drop-down menu and hit send. You do not need to select the recipient because your question will go directly to a moderator. Dr. Hodes, I've heard from many GSA members that the payline and surrounding budget issues are of great concern to them. We've already received many questions, a number of which you addressed in your presentation, and many more that I'd like to pose to you now. First, 1 year ago, the low NIA payline was causing considerable angst, shall we say, among researchers nationwide who were looking at an 8% payline. Here in June of 2011, it appears that it has recovered dramatically, with early-stage PIs looking at a 16% payline and established PIs looking at 11% payline. How did you improve the situation so quickly?
Well, the approach to this was manifold, and as I noted earlier, this was a high priority for the Institute. And it was done first by communicating, in fact, to the field, and investigators who I think understood well that given the great pressure on our payline, that we were going to be more selective in both the permission to receive and in the award of the more expensive applications. And we saw a response to this, in fact, from investigators, so that the average cost of applications that we received itself decreased. And this was gratifying. It was gratifying because I think it reflected the understanding of scientists, and it reflected their rationality in understanding that if we were going to make more rigorous decisions based on more expensive awards, it was incumbent upon them to find ways to carry out their research through cost-effective means. In addition to having this impact on applications received, we instituted, as I illustrated, differential paylines for the more and less expensive awards. We also modified the funding for Institute-established set-asides and priorities. We've always been constrained or modest in the magnitude of those set-asides, so that, for example, over the past several years, there has never been more than 8 to 9% of our RPG or grants budget that has been aside for specific initiatives. But we reduced this still further, having that level and more in 2010 to have more funds available for funding the investigator-initiated applications. And it was then the sum of all of these efforts which resulted in the outcome that we've been able to communicate with you today.
Thank you. And looking a little further back, it was questions come in that indicates that sometime late, perhaps in 2008 or 2009, there was a change in how NIA develops budgets or how they're structured that, I guess, essentially eliminated division-specific budgets. First of all, is that the case? Has this change resulted in the outcome you were seeking, and what effect, if any, has this change had on the NIA payline?
Well, yes, it's correct that what in previous years had been budgets or allocations to the separate divisions were eliminated several years ago, and it was done in response to the very trend in budget that you've seen. As we saw budget in current dollars, in constant dollars rather, eroding, and we saw the need to cut back on the ability to fund research, we did not at that point feel it appropriate to have differential budgets for the divisions, which could have resulted, if left to previous practice, in fact, in differential paylines for different components of the Institute. And This was something we did not think was in the best interest of supporting aging-specific research overall. That is, if we had had more biological or behavioral science differentially funded one over the other, it would have led to changes in balance that might not have reflected the priorities overall of the Institute. So we therefore instituted a single payline. This means that the applications that come into all of the programs are competing for the same funds in a single payline. I should note that as we track this to see whether there has been a dramatic or profound impact on the balance of awards across programs, indeed it has not. So this reflects the fact that the peer review, the excellence of applications being submitted in all areas across aging research has maintained the balance as we saw it. And maybe to expand a bit in answer to your questions about our ability to respond and make a difference in the course of a year, or the complement of that question, what had been responsible for the lower payline in years past, there has been a sense we have certainly heard that the reason for diminished paylines in, for example, 2010 had to do with investments made in prior years for areas of research that involved large awards, such as clinical trials. And what our ability to make a difference in a year reflects, I think, is a subtlety in reasoning that really requires some discussion. If we funded 5 years ago, in 2005, a large clinical trial, or didn't fund that clinical trial, but instead funded a large number of smaller awards, in 2010, 5 years later, when all of those awards had finished, we would have an equal amount of funds available for funding in 2010. So, in fact, we have flexibility each year to make decisions that best suit the funding circumstance for that year. And so clinical trials were funded at a time several years ago when the funding picture was different than it is now, but it did not in any way really restrict our capacity to respond to changes in the budget circumstance as reflected in what's happened in this past year.
That's very helpful, and it somewhat leads into the question of if that's the case, as you talk about the changes over a 5-year period, will there be a cyclical effect of with the challenges with the lower payline earlier, say in 2008? If grants were for a 5-year period, is there a chance it could be cyclical in 2013 or 14? We could be up against something, and if that's the case, are there ideas about how to manage that, or if perhaps it's not the case?
It's a very good question, and we do talk about cycling a good deal, and it means just what, as you've indicated, that if we fund a certain number of grants in a given year, that 5 years subsequent, those funds will become available, and so what happens 5 years earlier influences what happens 5 years later. So we have, in particular, as you might imagine, in this past year of constrained budgets, done a very careful analysis of cycling and our ability to predict. And in fact, we are not able to predict with very great accuracy. And that's illustrated particularly in the events of this year, when unanticipated there was, in fact, a 1% decrease in the budget for NIH overall and for NIA, and in response to that, a change in policies which altered the so-called inflationary increases allowed in non-competing awards. Those two factors so dominated others that, in fact, they dampened what might otherwise have been an uncomplicated cycling. So the short answer to your question, for better or worse, is that we really cannot predict with great accuracy 5 years looking forward what will happen. We rather have to pay a more careful attention in real time, ongoing, to budget prospects for this year and next, even as we wrestle now for our projections of what might happen in 2012, and make our accommodations in real time, maintaining flexibilities in order to be able to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Hodes, as a professional membership organization in the aging field, GSA is acutely interested in the future of aging research and ensuring the next generation of research leaders is being cultivated. We applaud the steps you've taken to increase the payline for early-stage PIs. Many have expressed, though, concern that the low NIA payline could drive up-and-coming researchers to other fields. And how are, you addressed a little bit, but how are paylines comparing to other centers? And do you have a sense, perhaps there's not data, or perhaps you have data, that as to whether or not the low payline has caused a flight to researchers who are not submitting to NIA and are submitting to other centers?
Well, thank you for that very important question, and it's really why We are so grateful to be able to speak to this GSA audience now and to communicate some of the facts that are relevant here. We are very concerned about the possibility that the payline in 2008 or various rumors or speculations about paylines in 2011 would have been misinforming applicants, leading to the temptation to leave the field of aging research. And so we are very much gratified to be able to communicate the numbers that we have now indicate that the paylines for NIA in fact have improved, and so far as we can tell, given the limited number of institutes who have posted their paylines, we are really at the same order of magnitude as others, and so there is not a strategic reason for investigators to be leaving the field of aging research. We'll know better by the end of this year and the applications received whether the outcome from last year resulted in a change in applications, but most importantly for us is forward-looking to make sure that the GSA membership, the aging research community, is best informed and can make its decisions about its research applications based on fact, and we're particularly gratified and determined to maintain a posture such that NIA and aging research will remain competitive so we don't lose the benefit of our current and new investigators in the field.
Thank you. Many questions are coming in from listeners that somewhat you should sort of read into them. It suggests perhaps there's a perception that funding cutbacks have affected their specific areas of research interest more than others. And I believe you indicated earlier that because of the new approach to budget management, everything is sort of together into one budget. And just wanted to clarify, is the pain as it relates to funding for project grants spread evenly across all areas, all divisions of funding, or are some areas affected more than others?
The impact is really relatively uniform across programs, and we do measure and track this in a number of ways. So we routinely, for example, track the way in which applications to each of our program divisions are scoring at CSR in terms of the scores they receive. And we can follow, therefore, the fact that they are relatively homogeneous and doing quite well in peer review. So since they're doing equally well in peer review, and since we have a single pay line that is equivalent across all programs and divisions, we can say that, in fact, the consequence of the pay line really is uniform across divisions and programs.
What that might be?
This is terribly challenging for all of us. In years prior to this year, quite frankly, we would not have considered the real possibility of an actual decrease in the NIH budget. I think we, along with all of you, are watching with enormous interest what's happening at the national level in terms of economy and budget process, and those questions loom so large that it's really very difficult for us to estimate pay lines. What we are doing is all that we can to provide flexibility towards the possibility that next year may be another year of constrained resources, and so we'll invoke many of the same processes which preserve the pay line in 2011. We'll again be looking carefully at the distribution of grants and costs. We'll be looking as well as a very modest investment initiatives and set-asides, even as we set the priorities for investigator-initiated research. So as I think I alluded to earlier, we are really driven these days to focus in real time, maintaining flexibilities and adjusting to them, rather than being able with any confidence to know what our budget will be next year and therefore to make any firm estimates of pay line based on that knowledge.
And in terms of pay line, I really, again, want to say how much GSA appreciates the steps you're taking to help improve the pay line for new researchers. Do any other centers use this dual pay line approach? There's a differential based upon new researchers versus established, as well as based upon funding, less than $500,000, more than $500,000. Is that common, or is that something unique to NIA?
Well, I can give you a simple answer, but then expand upon it a bit. The simple answer is that in terms of different pay lines based on the cost of award, we're not aware of any other institute that does this. There are other institutes that will have multiple pay lines for different mechanisms, but I need to elaborate. Many institutes do not actually award percentile scores to many of their more expensive mechanisms or awards, so that those awards actually are not assigned a percentile and therefore not constrained to a pay line. It is actually therefore not possible from the outside to actually know whether there is an equivalent greater constraint being put upon more expensive awards than lesser ones because, again, to summarize, many institutes don't score or publicize a percentile rating for their more expensive awards.
Very good. And when when sort of monitoring the payline and sort of measuring how we're doing, you talked about payline versus success rate, and I certainly understand that payline's more institute specific. I guess I'm wondering, should we be looking more and start get people thinking more about success rate as the metric? And if that's the case, based upon the data you shared, it does look like the success rate overall for NIH sort of stabilized 2006, 7, 8 or something, and NIA success rate still seems to be heading the wrong direction. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I think that in general, the success rate will flow with payline, and that was reflected in 2010 when both the payline and success rates for NIA were suffering even relative to other NIH institutes. We now know that in 2011, that relatively speaking, the payline has corrected itself to be more in line with other institutes, and we would predict that this will be true of success rate also. Unfortunately, for those paying attention to success rate, it cannot and is not calculated until after the end of the fiscal year, so we won't know until sometime into the fall, but I think it certainly should be attended to then. I would expect that it will become closer to the NIH norm as has occurred for the payline.
Great. Thank you very much. Some more questions have come in from listeners. One indicated that they've been told that NIA is not going to fund many more behavioral random clinical trials, and just trying to find out what's randomized clinical trials. Is there any truth to that notion, or I'm not sure where that comes from?
Well, there has been, to my knowledge, no such discussion, much less decision in that direction. I can say, as we've talked about, that as we pay attention to paylines and funds available, that certainly for all of our larger research projects and clinical trials can be among them, be they behavioral or medical or other, they'll be receiving appropriate and equivalent scrutiny. But no, there is certainly no decision to specifically single out behavioral randomized clinical trials for any special scrutiny or reduction in investment.
Very good. And you referred to in your presentation sort of big science, and just wondering if you had any sort of thoughts about how the investment in big science, what it's leading to, or any thoughts about the prospects for having large payoff down the line.
Well, big science, if it's defined by budget level, as it usually is, of course, is a very heterogeneous research group. For example, people often think of clinical trials high on the list of big science, and clinical trials appear when the opportunities based on basic and translational research over years generate the priorities, both in terms of public health and scientific opportunity, that they merit such a large investment. So in one very real sense, the ability to conduct a clinical trial, while it is a severe cap upon budget, is also a sign of success and maturity in the field. We will continue to support clinical trials when they're judged to be meritorious. We now have in place a very rigorous process for pre-screening and evaluating clinical trials, prioritizing them in consultation with our advisory council to make sure that when we do invest in such trials that they are truly of the highest priority. So that's one category of large science, but there are many others. Some of them are in measure infrastructural, so as we support large population-based studies, and the Health and Retirement Survey is perhaps one of the best known. These investments provide a data set that is rich in behavioral, social, biologic, and administrative data that then becomes a resource for use by multiple investigators, so that hundreds of investigators have in turn used this infrastructure, often to support research where it can be itself relatively less expensive because it is based upon the infrastructure in place. Big science could be construed to be the contracts we have in place to age rodents for use in aging research. Again, this is done to fulfill the needs of investigators whose investigator-initiated applications have been successful and who need those aged animals to carry out their research. Perhaps one other example is the area of program project grants. Only down to about 9 institutes at NIH, I believe, that currently use that mechanism. NIA is one, and again, in our most recent evaluations, it continues to be reflected as a very successful mechanism. The awards are expensive, but they contain multiple projects by multiple investigators. They often support pilot projects and serve a training career development function as well. So we look at each of these categories of big science and large science with great care because they're large investments, but again, look at them for what individually they represent in terms of benefits to the field and ultimately to public health as well.
Thank you. Another future-oriented question, sort of back to trying to predict the future if we can here, about some of the global budget caps that are being contemplated as we look out towards fiscal year 2012. And just wondering how you see it potentially impacting NIA funding is the question from the listener.
Well, as was the case in the response to the crisis of this year, 2011, the crisis constituting an actual reduction in the NIH budget, and NIH leadership, which includes the leadership of all the institutes and centers, has worked very closely together on solutions to address that impact that are in the best interest of all the institutes and centers. So although I unfortunately have to reiterate again, and it is not possible to predict precisely what impacts are going to be of budgets in out years, the solutions to them are going to be in large measure NIH-wide. The problems and challenges are going to be largely NIH-wide and in common. We will continue at the NIA level to make our own adjustments as they best serve the needs of the Institute, but that will be in combination with what will be some agency-wide adjustments to the budget outcomes, which we yet can only very imperfectly anticipate.
We got questions coming in, Dr. Hodes, trying to better understand some, I guess, requirements around different types of awards, and it has to do with selection criteria for the Gsa K23 awards. And I guess trying to ask, are the criteria much more robust for those type of awards than for general K awards? This is perhaps getting into a level of detail that perhaps we can track down much better on the NIA website, but just questions come in from a listener.
If the question is really whether the same application submitted to the Gsa program with another K program would fare differently, I don't know. We really don't have experience, of course, the same application regarded and reviewed in both venues. I think that the selectivity is very high in all those programs. Though we regard them as important, the success rates are still going to be constrained, and I think that the decision about which program should be the target of application, and they're not mutually exclusive, really depends upon the stated areas of emphasis in the Gsa program and the degree to which the applications meet those standards.
Thank you, Dr. Hodes. Appreciate that. Got just a couple more questions before we're going to have to wrap up here. And one, I just want to ask you if we could revisit. We were having some technical difficulties earlier, and there's an important question that came up regarding the collaboration between NIA and AOA, Administration on Aging. I just want to ask if we could sort of revisit that. If you could say a few words about that collaboration, please.
Okay. Well, I opened by noting that collaboration has over the past months and year or so been very much reinforced and intensified, so that we now have regular leadership meetings with AOA and subgroups that are pursuing several areas of our common interests. I also noted that some of the successes currently in place have utilized the ability of AOA and its connection through demonstration projects and delivery of service to translate the outcomes of NIA-supported research. The one example I noted was that of the REACH program, which is an NIA-supported research initiative, a clinical trial, in fact, of behavioral interventions which were intended to improve the quality of health and life for those who are taking care of individuals with Alzheimer's disease, as well as for the life quality of those afflicted with Alzheimer's itself. And the clinical trial results in this case indicated that interventions both improve the mental and physical health and well-being of the care providers, as well as delaying the need for institutionalization of the patients with Alzheimer's disease, so they were able to maintain themselves at home for a longer period of time as very much desired. And now the ability to take this clinical trial result and translate it into widespread application in the community has been facilitated enormously through interaction with the AOA, which has adopted it now in a number of their demonstration projects and centers.
Thank you. Another question's come in, again, talking about training researchers of the future. And there seems to be a perception among some that NIA funding for training grants has decreased. And the question is this perception accurate? And what does the future hold for training grants?
The investment in training has not decreased. We have been, across all of NIH, facing questions about how to manage training with limited budgets. I can say that one priority we've particularly given at NIA and across NIH as well is to the fact that in addition to supporting an adequate number, if not an optimal number of trainees under times of budget constraints, we also want to pay attention to the adequacy of the support or stipends that these trainees are receiving. There's been relatively little increase in stipends, making it more and more difficult for trainees to support themselves and therefore to find a fellowship program as a sustainable one, particularly at the time when an increasing number of such individuals are already moving through periods of having families to sustain. And so in a modest way, because our budgets allow only a modest investment, we'll be in fact looking at the ability to increase stipends as well as sustaining our overall level of funding for training so that we can make it livable for people who want to commit themselves to research to make it through these years in training.
And if you were talking, Dr. Hodes, to a new researcher coming out trying to decide where to submit their first grant to NIH, and they were trying to decide between NIA and some other institute, what would you say to them?
Well, I think the very first suggestion I'd make is that they understand where their own intellectual and public health passion is, that individuals who are excited by the science and the public health imperative of aging research ought to make this the place where they submit their first application. We're going to be doing all that we can to sustain the success rates, to make our areas of research as competitive as others. And the other complementing bit of advice I would give, perhaps not given early enough in careers necessarily to individuals, is to take full advantage of the outstanding and committed program staff that we have at NIA. And this means at the very onset, when one is designing an application for a fellowship, for a K award, for an RPG or one of the R awards, to contact NIA. It doesn't matter if you don't get the right person from our webpage to begin with. We'll make sure you get to the right person. A primary goal and objective of our very talented staff is to work with applicants to help them understand the best place for their research to be submitted, to work with them even in helping to critique their applications. There shouldn't be any misconception. The program staff is very much here to ally itself with and help scientists in support of research. There shouldn't be any misperception that this is somehow adversarial, that we're challenging you to come in so that we can critique your applications in any adversarial way. We are really all on the same side, and anyone who doesn't take advantage of this, I think, is missing a grand opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would also mention on that note that a great opportunity for researchers to hear about NIA and get to know the staff better is at a lot of national meetings, including the Gsa meeting. NIA is always present there and has a session to talk to the researchers, as well as AGS and others. And we really appreciate the time you take to be there.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's something we look forward to every year, and we know it competes with other sessions at the meeting inevitably, but we do our best to both present an overview of research, and then importantly, as you know, and many of the people on our conversation know, then to break out into groups that allow the attendees to have a chance to do just what I was discussing, to meet with representatives of the programs and areas of their own interest and establish relationships that will serve them well.
We've reached the end of our Q&A portion, and before we wrap things up there, Dr. Hodes, I just want to see if you have any final remarks or comments you would like to make to individuals listening on the webinar today.
I would above all like to thank you, as I said at the outset, for this opportunity to speak with you. It's our interest and our commitment to making sure that we communicate as fully as we can with the research communities who carry out the research and with whom we are partnering. We do it at national meetings, we do it in publications, and we're very excited about this webinar as yet another vehicle for doing so. We look forward to feedback on how this worked and making best use of all the media we can to carry out this commitment to communication.
Thank you, Dr. Hodes. And now that the webinar is concluded, the first order of business is to thank the NIA for helping us out today. I want to acknowledge the entire dedicated team of NIA staffers that we have the privilege of working with, who do so much to ensure the aging research enterprise remains strong here in the United States. We'd like to especially recognize Dr. Marie Bernard, NIA's Special Liaison to GSA. And, of course, a final thank you to our guest presenter, Dr. Richard Hodes, for taking the time to be with us today and to answer our questions and address our concerns. We look forward to continuing our strong partnership with NIA as we move forward. We'll also be keeping GSA members informed about future budget developments and advocacy opportunities in our print and electronic newsletters. The GSA team is going to archive today's webinar on our website at www.jron.org/webinar. The full audio, along with Dr. Hodes' presentation, will be available this afternoon. We also will post the full text of the questions and answers in the next few days. GSA additionally is going to send a follow-up online survey to our participants today, so keep an eye out for that. Lastly, I'd like to also thank our co-sponsors, the Friends of the NIA and the American Geriatric Society, and I gratefully acknowledge the GSA members who made today's webinar possible through their contributions to the Gsa Innovation Fund. This concludes our presentation. Have a wonderful day.